want to now introduce to the panel and the viewing audience our moderator, who will then introduce the other panelists. Our moderator is Miss Michelle Johnson, and I am very happy to have Michelle moderate this panel. Michelle has a background in marketing, communications, education, and community work. She is a multifaceted Guyanese personality, a pleasure to chat with. She's a lecturer in at the university level in the Bachelor's of Social Science degree in Business Management at the University of Guyana. So Michelle is a fantastic person to interrogate all of the technology folk about what you really mean by this, because as I was saying earlier, many people do not understand what all of the technology challenges mean for them. So Michelle, please, I'm counting on you to make it real for the rest of us and to help the panelists help us to understand where technology can take us and the risks that are presented by the technology. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Can you hear me?
Beautiful, yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And really, it's a pleasure to be joining all of you this afternoon. And you know, as I was preparing, and I thought of many things that have happened since the pandemic started. For example, how things have changed globally and in the region. And, you know, there's more use of web conferencing, for example, as we're doing here. Video platforms have increased, cyber attacks have increased, and so much has changed. And it had me thinking that this says to me that more than ever, today's focus is quite critical, that have come at a better time. You know, it is imperative that we change what we do, the way we do things, and we heard a lot about pivoting today. And the context of our topic, significant change is what is required, and that's what we've been hearing. You know, we have to change for a more innovative region on the path to sustainable growth and development. And as the Honorable Minister has observed earlier today in his address, the pandemic has become a disruptor. And it has really shown us very forcibly that constructive change requires agility. And Sana was just talking about that in introducing the context, creativity and innovation, and really a very purposeful shifting of minds and societal norms. Today I'm joined by a very, very distinguished group of Caribbean business executives, thought leaders, professionals in the field of risk management and technology. And it's my pleasure to introduce once again Sana Bradbeer, who is Group Chief Risk Officer with First Citizens Bank, Anthony Sabero, Chief Operations and Compliance Officer for Hitachi Security Systems Incorporated, Kirk Henry, Chief Executive Officer of iGov TT, and Joel Richards, International Trade Specialist with the OECS Geneva Mission, Philip Lewis, Managing Partner, Lead Consultant, Innovation and Transformation of LCI Consulting Incorporated, and Kennedy Richards, Jr., Member of Parliament at Point Fortin, Trinidad and Tobago. A very good afternoon to each of you. I want to warmly welcome you to today's discussions and to welcome our participants as well, joining us from across the region and the diaspora. I want to say that you can look forward to very relevant and solution-oriented discussion. And in turn, we also look forward to hearing from you, participants. So send us a hello, a comment, a question via the chat option in the bottom of your screens. And we shall be dedicating some time at the end of our panel discussions to take your questions. I want to get right into our discussions with a question for Kirk Henry. Earlier today, one of our keynote speakers, the Honorable Minister Gonzalez, he very candidly spoke on what his ministry is doing, but he also noted But while there are some inherent challenges of people and process, innovation cannot be buried in bureaucracy.
Mhm.
Kirk, in a recent interview with this group, your response to question and challenges that the country faces in shifting towards a more technology-driven economy was, and let me quote you, leaders must recognize that pushing ICT and diversification agenda is much more than a catchphrase. It must be actively encouraged. So tell us, Kirk, what should governments be doing to enable more robust technology, one, and two, what are they not doing?
Well, thank you. And let me just start by thanking the Management Academy for having me. I think we need more of these kinds of discussions to incubate the ideas and to stimulate the discussion across both the private and public sector. Um, so you replayed my words, and I think on the face of it, I think it is critical, and I've been hearing this theme throughout these types of discussions and the fora which I have had the privilege to sit in on. And I think critical to moving forward with the adoption and more pervasive use of technology is the mind shift. Um, and I say that again, I want to add a perspective which speaks to moving away from just using the catchphrase. And earlier today, in one of the other panels, it spoke about being courageous. And if we are to move the direction which we all know that we should be moving in, I think it starts at the leadership. Now, in recent times, you would have seen from the Prime Minister and ministers the push in that direction. So it is there. So I think we are at a point in our history as a country where we have buy-in from the top. I think the challenge that we are faced with is transmitting that strategic intent into the operations, particularly of the public sector. As you would know, change is never easy, and particularly in an environment where we have regulations, processes, procedures, which were geared towards a different time, a time where change was slow, where there was a certain degree of predictability to activities. Nowadays, there's need to respond in a more agile manner to a changing environment. And I think in order to make or to give life to the vision that our leaders in government have espoused, I think it's critical that we move our minds and we move beyond talking or speaking about the activity, but being courageous enough to take the risk to implement it into our environment. Because unless we take that deep dive, so to speak, one, we will not benefit from the learnings to be gained from an imperfect implementation. I always tell my team, perfection is the enemy of good. And if we stay and we wait and we use the traditional approach where we dot all I's, cross all T's, and we use what we all are familiar with, the waterfall approach to delivery, we would tend to have a low degree of success. So I think critical is getting the culture and the mind shift arranged in a manner to facilitate the implementation and to use the technology, because the technology is there. It's usually the easy part. The harder part really revolves around managing the people and the process. So the other part of your question speaks to what we're not doing. And the reality is, again, I want to refer to the thrust. I mean, the government has outlined a vision for the use of the technology in the country, and it is proper. What we need to do is to retool ourselves to start seeing what we do not as an end unto itself, but as a journey. because digital transformation is a non-trivial activity, and it's something that is ongoing because the environment is constantly shifting. And if you're familiar with Moore's law, the rate of change is increasing. So I think it's an interesting to say what we are not doing. We know what we are not doing. We need to make use of the technology more. We need to look at our processes and optimize to benefit from the use of the technology. And it would be remiss of me not to mention that we need to understand the role of risk management in our processes and our activities, because risk management, it is not just something that is confined to the hallways of the finance department and organization. It is pervasive. I mean, I always tell or refer my colleagues to what happened around 2008, when a large part of the problem that was felt in the financial world is arguably maybe attributable to operational risk, which manifested in a lot of the lenders on Wall Street. So I think that is how I would characterize what we have to do. I am very optimistic about the future, because what I'm hearing is not just in the government, in the private sector, I'm hearing more and more talk and a recognition of the importance of making use of the technology and recognizing the importance of it as we seek to move past the dependency we have on those resources which we have to extract.
Thank you very much, Kirk Henry. And it's interesting that you said we have the technology and we know what we have to do. But the minister in his discussions this morning mentioned that the tech has not caught up with the ideas. Like you, he's saying we know what we have to do. And we've been talking about it for years, but technology has not caught up with it. And COVID has come and shown us that we need to get there. I like your perspective and what you shared, and you also spoke about transformation. I wanted to move to Sana, actually, to ask her a question on digital transformation. So I'm going to come back to you a little later on in the discussion, but Sana, I thank you for the context that you introduced earlier. And, as a leading private sector executive with insight into the level of consistency, collaboration, and agility that is necessary for digital transformation, can you share your insights on how government and private sector are collaborating to effect increased use of technology, and also add in what specific areas and industries? So Sana.
Yep, thank you, Michelle. So, I mean, the way I would start is I have a natural bias with the financial industry, and that's where I see a lot of collaboration happening. So I'll start there, and you can see that once you start with that industry, the rest of it, there are effects that will happen with the others. So when you think of the collaboration happening right now between government and private sector in the financial industry, there is a lot of work that, in particular, when I say government, I'm thinking starting with the regulators. If you are going to launch new financial technologies, you have to look at, I mentioned in my opening context, the fintechs. And I know many of the central banks throughout the Caribbean, they are looking at innovation hubs, regulatory sandboxes, and they're setting it up, and it's been set up. So right here in the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, they have set up a regulatory sandbox. And at least and I know there were talk even in the previous panel, and Kirk mentioned it as well, the courage needed, and how do we build that society where we are willing to experiment and take those steps. And I think this is a good step in the right direction, the creation of those sandbox, the innovation hubs by the regulators. It allows any technology company that wants to launch, they can actually do that via these mechanisms and still have the oversight of the regulator, but at the same time has this room, for want of a better word, to experiment while you have the oversight. So it's allowing that courage and innovation to happen. And I think it's an important step throughout many of the central banks in the Caribbean. I am particularly excited, I'm sure the audience and the panelists are aware. I mean, Bahamas has launched their e-money in October, which is called the Sand Dollar, and I really like the name, the Sand Dollar. and the sand dollar. So I think it's very important that all of us look at that. Look, yeah, sorry, I thought someone wanted to say something. Look at that, look at what's happening there. Because if we can see what's happening with the sand dollar, then you see how e-money can really take over the potential. And then you also see what did not work, what are the risks. And again, part of being courageous, part of it being innovative. So the collaboration is really happening from the regulatory side. Legislation, I think, is also important. Governments, in order to collaborate with the private sector to really have the impetus for digital transformation, the right legislations need to be enacted. Data Protection Acts, Electronic Transaction Acts, many of them are at different stages throughout the Caribbean. Ours in Trinidad, there is work being done, but it is partially enacted. And again, you need to have those proper legislations in place in order to fuel the e-commerce. But nevertheless, COVID would have resulted in an increase in many businesses using e-commerce. So even despite the lag in the regulations and the legislations, you're seeing when more and more businesses are willing to come on board with the e-commerce. And I think also where throughout the Caribbean we're seeing good collaboration is really in incentives. So many governments have announced tax incentives, financing incentives for tech startups, companies. Just recently in Trinidad and Tobago in our national budget, there is an incentive announced that companies who invest in technology solutions or digital transformation efforts, you can actually get tax breaks and tax incentives. So I think those are the ways that governments, again, can enable the digital transformation, and you see that collaboration taking place.
Thank you very much, Sana. It was really very enlightening to hear some of the collaborations already taking place. And yes, actually the financial sector kind of leads the other sectors, because in looking at the impact of COVID, you find that was one of the hugest impacts. You know, people wanted to be able to do things from home. You can't do anything without your money. You need to be able to move money around. You need to be able to move money around safely and with the confidence that, you know, it will happen as you wanted it to do without any confusion and disruption. But you spoke about courage. And I was really encouraged to learn that MP Kennedy, who I'm going to ask to weigh in next, he actually has high among his achievements as the youngest mayor in Trinidad and Tobago, a lead role in introducing digital strategies such as fintech for cashless payments, as well as live streamed online meetings and so on. And to me, I mean, when you talk about courage, he has had the courage. So I want to know what MP Kennedy, what would you add to what Sana has shared in terms of government and private sector collaboration for increased use of technology?
Good afternoon to all distinguished panelists. First, I'd like to say that that Sana hit the nail on the head. In order for this to be effective, there must be strategies, and the government must have a framework to assist in pushing the narrative of technology. We would have seen from this last national budget, as Sana did say, that there are incentives, and this incentive is going to encourage entrepreneurs, encourage new businesses to just take that leap of faith, because you need that will. Because we need that will. Our culture doesn't dictate that we go into technology. We are very structured and kind of archaic in terms of the way we disseminate different services. Sana would have spoken about fintech and about the banking sector and that. But to me, technology is for everything. So technology is for everything, but we must find that solution that is going to be best fit for what we want to do. So let me just take you back to, as you were saying, about the payment strategies. And it's not just payment strategies alone that we enabled in Point Fortin while being the mayor. I saw a social problem, and that social problem was twofold. Firstly, it was being able to identify who actually needs, and secondly, it was getting it out to them in a timely fashion. And pre-COVID, I think everyone in this panel would appreciate the fact that we needed, to advance technology in our country. But post-COVID, when COVID hit, it seems as though we were unprepared for this whole new paradigm shift in the country, right? Matter of fact, in the world. So now you see getting an iPad or a tablet online is something big. You had to put in your order, and then it's gonna take a couple of weeks or even months just to get something that took you a few days. Pre-COVID. So my thing was I needed to help those who were vulnerable in society, those who would have lost their jobs, those who were on social welfare, and those who needed to get things done. And we needed a way to ensure that checks and balances were maintained, right? Because at the end of the day, you are dealing with not just government funds, but you are dealing with those who would have given donations to ensure that this happens. So you must be able to account for what you have been doing or how your stewardship. So I reached out. So everything was in my mind, and then I reached out to WePay, and we were able to put together something that gives us, that effective way to distribute, digital grants, as well as we launched the cashless borrow initiative, which is online payments and payments without cash, because looking down the road, my trend of thought is that we need to increase safety and security within our borrow. And that means that if it's 30 or 40% of people have been unemployed, there may be a percentage that seeks out crime as a way to make a living. So in order to protect the small businessman, whether it's a burger cart or whoever who's vending late at night, we came up with that initiative. Listen, let's go cashless. So if someone comes, mostly you guys have a burger or a hot dog or something like that. But so we have to utilize that technology to take us into the direction that we need to go. But as Sana said, listen, this is going to take courage, this is going to take will, and it's going to take the government to also be a driving force. And the government in Trinidad and Tobago has started that by giving incentives to encourage in that direction. But going back to our culture would dictate that we are kind of laid back and laissez-faire and kind of wait for the government to just say, do this, do that, do the other. But it's going to take our entrepreneurs and tech companies like WePay, and there are a few others, but tech companies like WePay, to actually go out on a limb and drive the process. The government has already started the policy, but I think this should be driven by entrepreneurs and the private sector.
Thank you, MP Kennedy. And I feel very heartened by what you said. And you gave a really good example of the collaboration between government and private sector with your collaboration with WePay. I think our audience will appreciate that you observe the risk associated with, personal security and just carrying cash around and all that, and did something about it. We can say that you were very agile about it and had to go in, and I suppose we can also say that it's very comforting and very encouraging when we look in the context that we're in. We know that is an example that shows we can get there. As Kirk Henry was saying, we know what we have to do. We can do it. And we're all very optimistic about what we can do going forward. So I want to thank you very much for sharing that and for giving that very good example as well, and Sana, to you as well for what you have shared. Now, I want to move on to the topic of cybersecurity risk. Just a few weeks ago, there was the news, and I'm getting some feedback. I'm not sure if somebody has the mic on. But a few weeks ago, there was news of a ransomware attack on Answer McCall. with some of ANSWER's IT systems being held, in exchange for payment. And I'm coming here to Anthony Sabero, who just this year spoke on two very important topics, which I believe are relevant to the next question. In May, he spoke at the Caribbean Bankers Association of Banks on navigating the pandemic for the banking industry, new cyber risks, and the acceleration of digital transformation. Another topic he spoke on was managing privacy risks, top to bottom, at the International Association of Privacy Professionals. And that was just last June. So my question for Anthony is regarding cybersecurity threats, public threats, whether it's public sector, private sector, and even at home, because you have now everybody is working at home or thinking of working at home. Children are being schooled at home. And as some of our earlier speakers and panelists in the previous panels spoke, there are risks associated with that. Mm-hmm. So Anthony, what can go wrong? And what?
Thanks a lot, Michelle. And thank you for the Academy for having me and asking for Hitachi to be part of this. Dana actually capped it off quite nicely. The issue about cyber risk, it's not partial for any vertical. It's not an issue that private sector versus public sector. You would have also, Michelle, picked up one of the mayors of Port, I think the mayor of Port of Spain admitting that, sharing, not admitting, but sharing that they would have been compromised as well, right? The issue about cybersecurity, particularly ransomware, it's not new. It's getting a little more profile now because I think institutions are willing to share their experience. So rather than being held ransom by these entities, they're going to share it and let you know what is happening. And then the harsh reality with the prominence of social media, it's very difficult to contain this kind of information. All right. So in the past, many years ago, where an entity may have been hit, that information or such a report will not be known in the public domain. But the social media, there's nothing I think is secret anymore. The harsh reality, and I'm saying it's a harsh reality because I'm not convinced that particular leaders, not on the private sector side, I think the private sector has a better appreciation of what's needed, but on the public sector side, I think there's a context that cyber threats are not relevant to me, or cyber threats we're too small. The Caribbean is too small for attacks because entities are looking to target multinational companies or more developed entities. But cyber threats are real, and why it's become even more amplified. COVID has, many of the presenters spoke about that, has amplified or increased the usage of technology. All right, actually, it has pushed the technology outside of the normal traditional parameter of an entity, and now it's sitting in people's homes. It's sitting on suppliers that in a total part of the world that you never worked with before. Because what COVID did is also impact on your supply chain. All right, and what it did, it forced people now to look at alternate suppliers outside and different elements. The fact that you're establishing that level of communication and the adoption of technology to be able to service those needs, you are increasing your surface attack. Because in the past where everything was a little more controlled, less online, everything is inside, you're protected with the internal parameter of security, now you're moving outside. All right, and by moving outside, you increasing that attack. And then I made the point earlier on in terms of there is a massive increase, almost 327% in terms of cyber attacks. And why is that? This is a business. People need to understand threat vectors, threat actors, they work hard for their salary. They have a very structured approach on how they go about their attacks. And they target environments or situations of where there's change or chaos. So the pandemic has created that. The fact that companies needed to pivot very quickly, apply technology rapidly, they know that there's possibilities of vulnerabilities may be exploited because the need is to try and get something in as quickly as possible to meet the needs of the customers. And that is why it is relevant. What we're also seeing as well is that, cyber threats also impact individuals. So you may have persons logging onto the network, and they basically put a ransomware and lock your computer, and sometimes that computer has critical information. I mean, a friend of mine was doing his thesis, all right, for his PhD, and everything was stored on that laptop, and he had to pay the ransom. He had to pay it, else 5 years of work just go down the drain. So what I'm putting to your panel and your listeners and your viewers is that cyber threat is real, and it will continue to be, because the exponential growth of technology and use of technology, all right, is going to drive the cyber threats capability and volume, because it's a striving business. Okay, and when I'll give you a case in point, just recently, not recently, but in January of this year, there is a threat actor that has in fact created a ransomware executable, and he's selling it as ransomware as a service. Just think about that. So you have Microsoft as software as a service, infrastructure as a service. He is saying here, what? I have a ransomware, you could use it, all right? And when you get the money back, all right, you give me a commission on that. That's the nature of cyber threats right now. It's very, very complex, but it's very, very structured.
Now, you spoke about what can go wrong, and with some very excellent examples, in fact, for businesses and government and so on. And it had me reflecting the study that Chelsea Braffett shared. She's a trade researcher with the Sridath Ramphal Center for International Trade Law Policy and Services. She was reporting on some research that had been done. And when she spoke about the government websites that have been hacked from Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, a number of OECS countries, etc., in Barbados, etc., some countries, the tax authority, The question that I would like answered is what can be done?
Well, a lot. I mean, the fact of the matter, while you may have heard of many attacks, there have been a lot of success stories as well. I think, and Kirk mentioned it early on, there need to be a shift in mindset. There need to be a shift in thinking. Just remember, technology is an enabler. All right, it's not a magic bullet. Everybody keep talking about technology, but it has to be, it enables a national agenda that involves people and processes. Okay, and the key thing is to one, understand that there is a threat, to understand that there is a risk. Sadly, I've seen entities spend a lot of money on investments and technology, but they don't spend enough money on security. So they want to leverage the benefit of technology, but they don't want to protect the assets. So the first thing I would say is that information security has to play a key component in the governance of that entity. So that's the first thing. Similarly, as we talk about enterprise risk governance, information security governance has to play a key part in that process. Then define what it is you want to achieve from a business objective. What are the business strategies you want and how technology would enable that? Parallel to that would be your information security program and how that program would be aligned to the technological roadmap. The fact is, a lot of people figure security is a high cost, and in some cases it is, but information security is to reduce the IT infrastructure complexity so that you can use the environment as securely as possible. And Dana made a very good point. You will never have zero vulnerabilities in any environment, but you must be able to establish what is acceptable within your risk appetite and make sure that your return on security investment is aligned to the benefits that you want to achieve.
Thank you. And I want to ask you, and perhaps any other member of the panel, if we were to let's say simply somebody working from home or kids being educated at home. If we were to give them one example, one takeaway about, how they should be careful or what they should be, how they should be protecting themselves against a kind of risk that can come through what they're doing on their home computer or, the instrument, what would it be?
The first thing is user awareness in terms of type of cyber threats. We talk about security awareness. One of the biggest exposure is always people. When you get hit with a ransomware, it's two vectors that the ransomware can come in the environment through. One is through phishing. So they send an email. The email has an attachment, so you get something from Dana and you assume that the address is correct. You open it, the executable stays in it, goes into your computer, inside your network. All right. The other areas, they do what is called reconnaissance. They actually go on the internet, do research on that particular entity, and try to get into the network to determine if there's any vulnerabilities, and then move it in. So I would say security awareness. All right, there's a saying in Zero Trust, which is basically don't trust but verify. So before you open any email, get a sense of what it is. Use as much controls as you can in relation to the what you call multi-factor authentication or dual authentication. Make sure that your passwords are properly secured. At home, I would also suggest you got what you call an encrypted router. All right, some routers already have that, so you just have to go in there and enable the encryption capability. Is it complex? No, because a good hacker can in fact go in there and try to work out the encryption, but it's another layer that you need to bring in as you go along. Make sure you have the latest antivirus software loaded, okay, so that it can protect your files. But the one I always suggest, even with my own kids, well, I say kids, but they're big horses, is that look at any unusual activity on your computer. Is it moving slow? Is it that it's taking long to respond? All right. And if you see that, I always say come off, shut off one time. All right. And slowly reboot and come back.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that's very valuable information. And I'm going to move to Philip on the question of cybersecurity as well. Philip, bringing your experience in both private and public sector, as well as your expertise across a number of business disciplines, including this digital transformation, I'd like you to add your viewpoint as well. Tell us from your perspective, is there anything else that can go wrong, and what is being done?
Yes, certainly, and I would like to echo thanks for the invitation to be part of this panel. And I want to just add to what Anthony spoke about in the at-home scenario. And unlike his kids, my kids are a lot younger, and we're talking 7 and 9 specifically. And one thing COVID has done is brought about a lot more schooling at home. So it means that my 2 young kids now are on devices when I never expected that they would have been on devices at the age of 7 and 9. So it means that they are part of my home network, and they're on their mobile phone and laptop computer, accessing emails. And therein lies an additional security threat. With adults, it's easy enough to say, don't share your password, don't open up certain emails, and so on. But how do you go about explaining that to a 7-year-old to determine or decipher between an email coming from his school versus a phishing attack type email? So it's just to say that what COVID has done is brought about online schooling, and we have to be aware and cognizant that that is going to include our children, children as young as 7 and 9 and so on. The other aspect from a security perspective is that children, all these devices also come with cameras, and it means that your children have the cameras on, and they don't necessarily have the same level of security awareness in the use of those cameras around your home and your property and so on. And it's just something else to be aware of, that there's information out there as your children take videos at home and so on, upload those to the school, whether they're doing a project and so on. If those videos become public, it just means that there's information about you, your family, your household, that's out there potentially in the public domain or accessible by people that want to access that they can all use against you. You know, so that's an example of taking information off of the internet, but using it potentially to do a physical attack on your property. So we just have to be very much more aware of the fact that children are on these networks now, and they do present a vulnerability variable to this issue of cybersecurity.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing from you is that when you think about risk management, we even have to teach that to our children. And I know that's something that the Academy is interested in taking into schools, because it's very important that they too think in terms of, what am I doing? What can be the implications? What risks are there, and what can be the outcome? So I'm really happy that you share that perspective. And in fact, I'm coming back to both you and Sana, because we spoke about working from home and the risks, etc. When we think about participants working from home, and Sana can lead on that, and I'll ask you to also weigh in, what can those participants who are viewing now, working from home, what can they take away from this panel to assist them with managing their technology risk?
So I think, Michelle, you know, both Philip and Anthony addressed a lot of the techniques and tools that can be used from the working from home perspective. The only thing that I would add additionally, and I think Philip spoke about, you know, with kids, now that you're at home and you're sharing that network, I think it's about constant education. And I know Philip said the younger kids, how do you educate them? But you have to be mindful, especially on the devices that you're doing work on. Try to, as much as possible, to avoid sharing those work-approved devices with, you know, other members of the family, because you also have to be mindful of what they may be doing with the device and what websites they may be going on. So, you know, as much as possible, where you are given work-approved devices, you should not really be sharing that with other family members as much as possible. I know in some cases it may be tough when you're working from home, but you know, that's the only other thing I would add. But I know Anthony and Philip did mention a lot of the tools and techniques. I did want to chime in earlier just to add to what Anthony was saying in terms of responding as well. And this is not only from a work from home perspective, but from companies dealing with cybersecurity threats. I do think, in addition to everything Anthony said, being able to respond to an incident when it happens is critical as well. So when you're preparing for cybersecurity, Anthony spoke a lot of what needs to be done from a technology perspective and prepare information security framework, but also having a clear, resilient, and an incident response strategy is important, you know? So be prepared for a cybersecurity incident, and what are you going to do in the event it happens? And that is very critical, you know, and ensuring you have the backups, everything from both a personal and a company perspective, backups are important as well.
And Michelle, what I can just add to both what Anthony and Sana said is the sharing of that information of when there has been an incident is extremely important. So whether it's at the private sector, and we all know the confidentiality issues that exist there. So usually, you know, because of reputational risk and so on, companies don't want to share that information. Same applies to governments and government agencies for various reasons. But typically we see in our Caribbean governments now that they are agencies set up that, whether it's private sector or public sector, that they can confidentially share that an incident has occurred and allow the authorities to, you know, take some level of action and assist in resolving that issue. But it is imperative nowadays that there is a sharing of information, and the more that can be shared and disclosed, I think it will drive and build awareness for everybody to take the necessary steps. And that equally applies at home, that people become much more aware of what can happen and the steps that they need to take to prevent any type of incident.
Thank you both so very much. I really like what you both shared, and indeed, we learn from setbacks, and it's only from sharing and letting others know what has happened that we can find solutions, and we can protect other people from experiencing the same thing. So that's very important. Now I'm going to shift gears to move to discussions on the state of technology in a region. And for that, I want to come to Joel. Because just last September, Joel, in an Eyewitness News op-ed titled Deal or No Deal, the Implications of Brexit for the Caribbean, you posited the need for a real partnership on both sides, Britain and the Caribbean region, focused on addressing ideas that will lead to sustainable socioeconomic growth and development for the region. Now, among priorities you listed was one, increasing access to new and innovative technologies to bridge the digital divide between ourselves and our developed country partners. Which brings me to my question. What would you say, Joel, is the state of technology use in different islands in the Caribbean? And, are any more advanced than others? Are there any more behind in your observation? Tell us a little bit about that, Joel. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and good evening to the other panelists as well. I think it's somewhat fortuitous that it's International Men's Day, and we do have a panel that is dominated by males. But nonetheless, I will proceed, and I'm saying that as well, not just jokingly, but part of the digital divide that you made mention of just now. There's also an aspect to it where there's a gender digital divide that we also need to address, and part of that has to do with getting women and girls much more interested and engaged in technology. But I digress. Directly to your point about where we are now in terms of the use of technology and so forth across the region, I think it's a fairly mixed picture. I think there are pockets of spaces across the region where we are seeing some very innovative and some very interesting things that are happening. I think Sana mentioned earlier some of the work being done on fintech as an example. We have the Bahamas launching a digital currency. We have the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union that is also in the process of launching a digital currency. We do have different islands where you see there are, for instance, incubators where they're hoping to encourage technology startups and so forth. There are islands who are involved in those things. I think where we have a problem is with respect to scale, where we are not doing things sufficiently at scale. And in order to bridge the digital divide, in order to ensure that the disruption that we're talking about is disruption that leads to positive outcomes, things have to be done at scale. They cannot be done in silos. It can't be a situation where some islands are doing certain things and others are pretty much behind. We are not going to see the kinds of transformation that we need if we aren't doing things at the scale that they need to be done. I'm going to go back to the issue of data, for example, that was mentioned earlier. And Sana was very correct in terms of the assessments that she made with respect to the lack of appreciation that we generally have in the region for data. And what we have in the region right now are very small internal markets, and that also relates to data. And one of the challenges that you see, and this goes right across the region, is that we don't yet have a coordinated and harmonized response, for example, to the issue of how do we treat with data? How do we monetize data? We aren't seeing enough of those things happening. And as very small islands with very small populations, these are things that in order for them to be effective, have to be harmonized. We have to pool whatever collective data, whether it be in terms of the shared numbers alone, in order to be able to monetize something like that. And so those are some of the things that I believe that we need to focus on. So where there are pockets of activities happening, there isn't yet the economies of scale taking place across all these different areas for them to be meaningful. And I think that's what we need to start focusing on.
Definitely. We need to be definitely more harmonized and in tune with each other to move forward as one progressive, innovative region. So I want to thank you for that. We'll come back to you a little later, Joel.
But Michelle, if I can, I would like to get Joel's insight, because this is something that, I mean, I'm in Montreal, so I'm in a sunny part of Montreal at -4 degrees. But one of the issues that I've always asked myself, why is there not a regional agenda? In terms of, because private sectors, they do it. They establish shared services in certain parts because they have international or regional presence. And certain, why is there a lack of a regional agenda towards that? Because that in itself is a solution. And I think I know the answer, but I really would like to get it from you. To some of the issues around scales, countries that with small populations. Why is that not a conversation that is not prominent? And I'll tell you something from my days working Republic Bank. I always recalled where we were trying to create some interconnectivity to regional switches, right? So that you could do payments across the different Caribbean islands. And that was really trying to move heaven and hell. So the natural solution was to use, Sina, you'll know that the natural solution was to use Visa and MasterCard and kind of make them the international switches. So, I really would like to get your perspective as to why there's not a regional agenda towards that.
Okay. And very good question, Anthony. I'm going to give you an example. So, for instance, when you look at our stock markets across the region, you'd realize that they're severely undercapitalized. But then you also notice that there's been a very disjointed approach to how we've pursued stock markets across the region. So there's a stock market in Barbados, in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in the Eastern Caribbean. And there isn't a pooling in order to create the scale that we need. Where the digital economy is concerned, where e-commerce and technology and all that is concerned, we do have in the CARICOM Treaty, which was signed in 2001, an article that says that we needed to adopt and pursue a very harmonized approach, a coordinated approach to an issue like that. I think one of the challenges we've had in the region is an implementation deficit as well. So for example, we do have an ICT for development strategy. The last time I checked, I think it was noted that it would take about $40 million US dollars to implement that strategy. But we haven't had sufficient movement towards the implementation of that strategy.
So what do we do to move forward?
Well, I think there's an element to it where there has to be some political will, first and foremost, because the political directorate is there really and truly to set the policy, but to ensure that the resources are available so that those policies can be advanced. Another element to it,
sorry, go ahead.
There's perhaps not sufficient demand from the private sector as well to get certain things in place.
And what I was about to say actually is that we probably need to lobby and to pressure the decision makers in that direction, because and it's good that we're having this discussion today, because it's really highlighting the fact that we have to collaborate, we have to speak to each other to move forward. So I'm very grateful that that question was asked of you. And I hope we can flesh it out a little more, but to move forward, I want to go on to the issue of digital transformation and coming back to Philip actually, because as we've been seeing, the pandemic has increased the importance of digitalization in so many things. Let's take lending, for example. When you think about after COVID-19, after the pandemic passes, we can anticipate that face-to-face meetings may no longer be the default method for meeting with clients, etc. And so we have to think about digitization and digitalization. And I'm going to ask Philip, can you explain for us what is the difference between digitization and digitalization, and what is to be gained through these processes?
Sure, and it's a good question, and where I'll actually take the question is back to the discussion that Joel and Anthony were just having, because it is
Excellent.
pertinent.
Excellent.
And so in short, digitization is just about using technology for process improvement. So it's about incremental, step-by-step change. So for a private sector company, for example, implementing a time and attendance system, or contactless payments, or automatic meter reading technology, it's just an improvement to an existing service or business using technology. And there are a lot of companies or governments, government agencies and so on, that there's a lot there that they need to do. They're not at the stage where they even have what I call the basics. They're not just using technology for the basics. Digitalization, however, is more strategic. It is about looking at your business model and transforming your business and your business model. It is about looking towards the future, but also ensuring that your business can survive even with the different shocks that can come up. And of course, COVID has painted the exact scenario, or the very real scenario of what can happen. So for example, any retail business that didn't have an online storefront before just had to shut down. When our various Caribbean countries had to close down or lock down, they had to shut down for that period of time. Having an online storefront in and of itself is not necessarily going the whole way, but really what you should be looking to do is digitize your entire supply chain and move your entire business to being digital, all the way down to customer service, for example. So that is taking your business model and saying, I am going to move totally away from a physical aspect to a digital world. And that is transformational, and it is very, very different, as well as looking at the different markets that then become accessible outside of just necessarily your local country. What we find in the Caribbean, and to be honest, it's mirrored in a lot of the world as well, is that the change that we would like to see to digitalization is not happening, and not happening at the pace that we would like to see it, or with the urgency that we need to see it. And again, COVID has given us the recent example of why we need to transform urgently, and we can't just leave it to having political discussions without any movement forward. So I think Joel highlighted some of the discussions that have been happening between our Caribbean islands, and CARICOM speaks to the single ICT space. And I think we all know that there is a tremendous amount of work that needs to happen there, and we're really not seeing the frameworks and legislation being put in place in a unified, harmonized manner across the Caribbean that would allow us to really have, a digital environment, whether we call it digital cities or whatnot, to truly take our economies, where they need to go.
It will definitely call for collective vision indeed. And with the vision, the action to go with it. I mean, if we can visualize something like an Amazon in the Caribbean, where we can supply each other very safely, very efficiently, if we have the confidence and the courage to move towards something like that, then, you know, it's a kind of digitization and digitalization of which you speak. Now we have to move very quickly. I want to come back to MP Kennedy and his passion and track record for digital transformation and his experience in government. Tell us, MP, how can technology use transform a private business or a government agency or entrepreneurs, for example?
Yes, the use of technology is being seen today as somewhat prohibitive. However, technology is just there to provide solutions that we need. So we need to find out what is our end game, whether it's the private sector or the public sector. We need to find out what is our end game. What are we looking to achieve? Are we looking to provide a service? Are we looking to make a profit? So once we know within that space, as either we want to provide a service, for most government agencies do that, provide services, and in the private sector, you in that business to make a profit. So then we would be able to tailor make technology in order to suit our needs, because man makes technology, so we need to find that space where technology and harmonize it with what we want to do to ensure that we get the best out of it. So let me just give you an example. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, I think is the Ministry of Legal Affairs, they would have launched GovPay. Right. One of the challenges with that was that people won't able to pay their whether it's maintenance or whether it's fees on time. The courts open from a specific time from 8 to 4. Cash may have been closed by 3 or 3:30, and that would have provided challenges for the working population. Because sometimes your boss is not giving you a time off to run and pay a ticket. Why you get a ticket in the first place? So what they did is they introduced GovPay, and GovPay is something that you could go at a lotto booth, and at that lotto booth you could actually pay your ticket through that system. So it provided an ease to the population to go and pay their fines. So what you have,
transformational.
Yes, transformation. So what you had was less people facing the courts, one, and for non-payment of fines, because you would have provided for them ease of access to pay. So it's simple things to incorporate technology to actually get big results. Right? But we as people need to know how we use technology. The technology is there, and I was listening to the previous panel, and someone said that that technology, I don't want to use the word prohibitive, but it's not that it's prohibitive, right? Everything has its challenges, and with the archaic system that we use to check and balance, now we could implement technology and create those same checks and balances. However, speed up the processes. For a simple thing as you go into a government agency and you want something signed off, it has to go to 10 people to get signed off, which is the checks and balance.
Mm-hmm.
But that 10 signatures could be done in a day, but sometimes it tends to be done in a month.
Mm-hmm.
So now we could utilize technology, right? Whether it's a network within the organization, to have that simple thing sped up so that you satisfy the public with the service that you are given. So we have a lot that we could learn from in this country, as well as the Caribbean. We have a lot that we can learn from. We have a long way to go, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel though. There are things out there that we could implement to make our lives easier, to make the processes smoother, and to just enjoy what technology has done for the world.
I like how you simplify it actually, because it really simply is that. You have to start looking at what is needed, why you want to introduce it, and therefore what needs to be done. So,
but Michelle,
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to ask Kenya a question, because maybe because I'm a private sector, you know, and I've been a banker for 38 years, I can tell you if a client needs to get 10 steps to get something approved in the banking sector, they will move to another bank. so all right.
Sometimes they don't
So,
have the
so I would challenge you thinking a little bit and say, look, just do 2 approvals. Now the challenge with that 2 approvals, you have to find 8 jobs for somebody. So all right. So I would encourage you to take maybe a transformational approach to it. All right. Because you see, if you use technology where your processes are restrictive, it's not going to add value to you. You have to leverage the full range of technology, and part of it is to redefine your processes. But we'll talk. I'm sure we're going to talk about that on the leadership section.
Yeah,
But yeah, because I do know, in all fairness, the private sector has shareholder value, and the government has what I call social value. All right, but at the same time, 10 approval levels might be a little too much.
I really like that we're challenging each other and asking questions of each other, and coming with different perspectives actually, because like you're saying, private sector is one thing, government is another, and you may not be able to break down the silos so easily.
Yep.
And earlier we spoke about the need to have conversations, and one of the questions that have come in so far is, why aren't the conversations happening, and what can be done to initiate such discussion? And this is from a Don. Why aren't these conversations happening? We spoke about conversations between public and private sector. And well, the good thing is that we did get some good examples from Trinidad, but we were just speaking about regional conversations and agreeing and moving forward. And you asked the critical question, why not? And well, Joel's response was, really and truly, we have to see the need to collaborate. So I think that question was answered even before it was asked. But I want to remind our viewers and our participants to continue sending questions, because we're coming up to the time that we want to answer a question or 2. But I want to ask Sana, and this is really our last question for the panel before we, talk with our participants a little more. And our discussions today point to the need for data-driven insights for optimal decision-making and outcomes, and for informing, planning and tracking, and some of those things were discussed much earlier today. Sana, can you tell us what are some of the technology tools that can aid in decision-making? And I'm going to invite if Philip or anyone else would like to add as well. What are some of the technology tools that can help us to make decisions?
So the way I would answer that, Michelle, is rather than say specific tools, let me talk about what are some of the things you should look for in the technology tools that you're going to employ. So in particular, from the risk management perspective, when you're looking at GRC software, which is governance risk compliance software, you want to make sure you look for tools that definitely data. We spoke about data throughout this whole panel because of the importance of data. You want to be able to make sure that the data you capture, you can do analytics on, you can identify trends. You want to be able to automate a lot of the processes and the capturing of that data, KPIs, who's accountable for what. So you want to make sure your software has certain features that will capture all of that. Scenario planning and scenario analysis is very important for risk management perspective. So even with all this data you have, you want to be as part of the analytics, the ability to maybe use certain parameters, change it, have assumptions so that you can see you truly, if certain events happen, what's going to happen to your business. So really looking at those characteristics in the technology. The other thing I would add before I open up to the panel to also add to this question is when you're looking at technology tools, and I mean, the panel spoke about it earlier, it may have been MP Richards or Joel about the prohibitive nature of technology. But if in doing your analysis and to determine what tools to use, think of also outsourcing as well, because there's also that option. And there are many providers. I know Anthony's here, so Anthony can also chime in, but there are ways you don't have to buy the technology yourselves. You can actually outsource many of your data protection services. You can outsource even the chief information security officer job. You can actually outsource it. You don't have to employ technology or even hire a person. So it's about doing that cost benefit analysis to determine what works well for you.
Yeah, I want to support what Sienna is saying. The only thing I'd add to that is make sure you do your due diligence with regards to those providers, because a lot of institutions tend to look at the ones at the lowest cost. But you know, my grandfather was saying, you get what you pay for. so just be mindful of that. Do your due diligence. And one of the things that we also, and I would suggest any one of you all, challenge your service providers in relation to their own information and data privacy programs. You know, how mature it is. Because in some cases, you're going to be sharing some of your information and data with that particular entity. So you need to pay particular attention to that. So outsourcing is basically an extension of your own internal resource, but make sure that you have strong controls and you do effective due diligence. And one of the things I always recommend is include in your contracts what is called the right to audit with those service providers. All right, so that it gives you that right to evaluate how effective they are. But I do support outsourcing. I wouldn't challenge that at all, Sina.
And my add to that is, as simple as it sounds, is garbage in is garbage out. So, you know, for effective decision making, what we're saying here is we need meaningful data. So you have to ensure that those tools are either getting or collecting or performing their analysis on meaningful, right, validated, authenticated data. So you've got to make sure your processes are there, that the data is meaningful and accurate, and then you can get relevant information coming out of it that you can make the right decision on.
Which Philip speaks about data governance, right?
Absolutely.
You need to have a strong data governance framework as well.
Michelle, I just wanted to add.
I was just going to ask you if you wanted.
Yeah, I want to add something to the discussion. Particularly as it relates to this whole notion of transformation for the region. And somebody mentioned the small market size, 6 million. Now, technology and the use of the technology, I like the point the MP made, and I think it's very relevant. We want to use the technology to solve problems for us, to make life, to create value, to change our environment, so that we could focus on other things. Now, I'm sure you all have heard before, and probably in other places, this whole notion of that efficiency is not a strategy. And what we would be doing, we could become as efficient as we want as a region, as a country, but we need to find ways to use the technology to create value for us going forward as we move forward with the diminishing natural reserves that we have of energy and the pivot. So I want to repeat. Now, it sounds weird. I got into IT when I was 10, when I got my first computer and I started to program. But the reality is the technology is just an enabler, and we need to extend our minds to figure out what do we need to do to make use of the technology as we go for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now. Because if we are extracting from a diminishing pool of resources, no amount of efficiency will save us. It will prolong. And instead of being an instantaneous death, it may be death by 1,000 cuts. But we need to transform the way we think to look for opportunities to bring value into the region. So I think it's important that we need to look at cybersecurity and those disciplines. And I think I think it would if we don't do that as leaders, I think we would be asleep at the wheel. And recognizing that risk, the whole practice of risk management as we go about delivering value is critical. To me, that's the starting point. But we need to start disrupting in this part of the world, because we have to look for the next thing. And we need to find a way, as we talk about the technology, how we make use of the logistics technologies that are available, so that our region as a whole could tap into that global 7 billion marketplace out there. Because I want to repeat it. If you're in a home and you have efficient power, you have an efficient microwave, your TV, low power, everything is efficient in your house. But to keep that house going, you have to bring in an income. No matter how efficient you are, it's not going to increase your income, especially if the income is fixed or diminishing. So we have to transform the way we think. So transformation for me is about you creating new offerings, creating new opportunities for our people and in this region to create value. And this is what the companies like the Amazon, we talk about them flippantly, but this is what they do. It means changing the way we manage our teams. Be willing to accept failure as part of our evolution to something better. I think those are some of the shifts, because we know what the problems are. We talk about them at the various forums all the time. We're good. At least my family, we're really good at saying what is wrong. But we need to start talking about what we need to do to move forward and stop repeating the problems we know that exist, and take the risk and be courageous as leaders. And as leaders, we have to understand something. And I will stop here because I could go on forever. We are often, as leaders, called to be accountable for things that we are not responsible for doing. And we need to support our team as they move forward, and whatever for it is, to take us forward. I just want to make that point.
And I just want to say amen, Kenny.
Yeah.
Cook. Just want to say amen, Cook.
That's really good. And thank you for that. I just want to add, as you mentioned, disruption as well. I think it's also with disruption comes that uncomfortable, you have to make society almost uncomfortable too, because we talk about disrupting society, Caribbean economies. Sometimes hard decisions have to be made. If it comes down to telling people, listen, you can't come in the banking hall to do this transaction anymore, or you can't buy this in a store anymore, and it's going to be uncomfortable. They're going to quarrel. But as a society, we have to make those hard decisions, and that's the only way you'll disrupt and get that going.
And if I may add very quickly, very quickly, because we're talking about transformation and improving people's lives. And I'm based in Geneva, Switzerland. And even though we're in a second lockdown, one thing that I have not had to go to a bank physically for perhaps the entire year, because using the app on my phone, I'm able to do just about any transaction, including wiring money abroad, switching monies between accounts. It's very seamless, extremely easy. And I recall just before I moved here, I had to go to the central bank in Barbados in order to get money from my own account to be able to send somewhere else. And it took me 2 days to get that done, right? So when we talk about transformation and improving people's lives, these are the very real solutions that we have to be offering to people in order to make a difference.
I want to respond to that. I think that's the very point we're trying to make here. I think we are extremely good at identifying the issues. Yes, there's an issue, and it has been an issue for the last 20 years. I think what we need to do, because somebody referred to the politicians, from where I sit now, I am very new to government. I started just over 2 years ago in iGovTT. I came from the other side, and what I can see, we are at a point in time, like I tell the team, it's a renaissance. It's a new beginning. We have the opportunity. I am hearing the politicians talking about it. They are saying, let us go in this direction. So the responsibility is us, both members of the public sector.
You're breaking up.
I'm sorry. I think the responsibility rests on our shoulders as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and as citizens of the Caribbean. We have to effect the change, and it must be apparent in all our activities, whether it is risk management, whether it is the way we do our finance management. I think it boils down to a mind shift. And I think it was somebody made reference to agility. When I think of risk as it relates to IT, I use a fairly, I don't want to say old model, but I look at 4 A's: the availability of systems, the accessibility of systems, the agility of systems, and the accuracy of the systems as it relates to the enterprise. But critical is the agility. We have to be able to respond. And I see a big problem exists in the way we as leaders, myself included, manage our teams to achieve objectives. It is critical that we shift and move from the old into a new way to achieve and to use what the MP said, to use the technology to create value for us.
Yes.
We created the technology.
And I have to interrupt now because time is upon us, but I want to thank all of you for the very forward-thinking contributions, a passionate participation, and deeply insightful discussions. And I know feel very confident, in fact, that the attendees are leaving with some very real nuggets of practical application. And with a hope, of course, for meaningful change. I mean, when I listened to Joel a minute ago, I was thinking, well, we do have some of those capabilities right here. And I was thinking we probably have to look at cultural change as well and how we move that forward, because not everybody is aware. And also the pace at which it is done, because some are able to do it better than others. So I want to thank all of you and to say that we've delved into discussions on technology advances, and it's a must for necessary and meaningful change. Sana highlighted and set a very good context. And, the rest of the panel, we had very rich discussions and solutions. So once again, our sincere thanks and appreciation to the Caribbean Risk Management Academy, all the sponsors for today, all the panelists. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much to the moderator. Thank you very much, Michelle, and to all of the panelists joining us. I think this was a really, really insightful discussion. And I am hungry to hear more. It's almost like if you want to, okay, so when can we reconvene this conversation? There is so much to do and learn and to share.